There has been a disconnect between Islamic and Western societies for centuries in terms of perceptions, attitudes, understanding. For centuries, first of all, Western societies, meaning the European societies, did not have any access to primary Islamic sources. They didn't know about Muslim culture. They didn't live with them until the Crusades. Crusaders came to the Muslim world. Strangely enough, the Crusaders were actually the first Europeans, properly speaking, to come to the Muslim world. And the Crusades lasted for almost 240 years or so, during which time, obviously, thousands of people went back and forth between Europe and Levant and Iraq and Palestinian territories, Anatolia, obviously. So that provided a context for some interaction. And it was only after that, really, more people in Europe began to realize the need to have this first-hand contact. And many of their myths about Muslim societies, Muslim culture, Muslim men and women began to change. Even after the Renaissance and Reformation, scientific revolution, etc., unfortunately, that perceptual gap was not filled properly. Even the rise of universities and scholarly studies at European universities were not enough because they lacked a proper perspective on Muslim societies, because they were just, in the 18th, 19th century, just reading books. But you cannot understand a society by just reading the books that they have written. You have to see, how they live, what kind of cities they have built, what kind of life energy they have in their daily lives, etc. That requires human interaction. Now, that obviously led to a lot of misperceptions coming from the early stages of Islamic Christian relations, beginning in the 8th and 9th centuries. Many Christian myths about the Prophet of Islam, about the Quran, the Holy Book of Islam, etc., spread among the masses in Europe. And a very prominent European historian, in fact, called it the Age of Ignorance because of this, because there was really no contact to understand Muslim culture and society. For example, even today, not many Christians know that Virgin Mary, is not only venerated in Islam, but she's also mentioned many, many times in the Quran. In fact, there is a whole chapter named after her. And Muslims believe in Jesus Christ as one of the most prominent 5 prophets. And the same goes true for Moses. If you don't believe in them as prophets, you cannot be called a Muslim properly. It's so as strong as believing in Prophet Muhammad. These are some basic things, but when you look at how much space or ground we have to cover, in fact, it's amazing after so many centuries of interaction and scholarly output and media and communication, etc., there is still this lack of understanding. And obviously that affects people's perceptions and attitudes towards one another even today. And the First World War simply deepened some of these misperceptions. Because on the battlefield, it was not a battle, obviously, between Muslims and Christians or Islam and the West per se. Ottoman Empire, allied itself with the Germans, etc. But I think it created a deeper sense of despair in terms of overcoming the walls of misperception and ignorance. Of course, when you look at the Muslim world today, it's still struggling with 2 things. One is it's trying to recover its intellectual, cultural tradition, trying to understand its basic principles. And on the other hand, the Muslim world is also trying to make sense of modernity. What does modernity mean? How it affects our lives, but more importantly, what does the relationship between tradition and modernity mean today for us to build a future tomorrow? There have been different interpretations of both tradition and modernity in both the Western world and the Muslim world. Some have adapted to it, some have accepted it without any conditions, some have completely assimilated themselves into it, some have taken a very critical position and critically engaged Western modernity. And many Western scholars have also raised issues about the promises of the Enlightenment, especially in light of the fact that you had 2 world wars where millions of people died. You had a Cold War era. You had the effects of the Industrial Revolution, where the gap between the rich and the poor became even wider, and the people lost sense of their lives. Nihilism, became rampant everywhere. It, affected maybe Western art and culture, and all of that led to a very serious and profound criticism of the promises of the Enlightenment reason and Enlightenment notion of the person, freedom, rationality, the individual, society, and so on and so forth. And I think we are still struggling with the impact of that process, of that critical thinking. As far as the Muslim world is concerned, obviously the Muslim world has a lot to reckon with, has to do a lot of soul searching. I've always said that it's only intellectual laziness to put the blame on others and not look at yourself for your own imperfections. Yes, obviously there are those who try to create political problems in Muslim countries, undermine whatever good efforts are being done to address issues of poverty, education, and things like that. And we have to be alert about these issues and confront them. There's no doubt about it. But at the same time, we have to work harder and realize that whatever change we are looking for is going to start from within. We cannot expect others to do it for us. And that requires that we have to take care of our own. We have to invest more in education, in science, in technology, have a proper understanding of tradition and modernity, the modern world, without losing our roots in our own tradition, but at the same time have an open horizon towards the world. We don't, close ourselves up to the rest of the world in the name of indigenous identity, but we try to strike a balance between the two so that we can understand the past, make sense of the present, and hopefully build a better future. The issue of Palestine is not just about land. It's not about just religion or ethnicity. It's about justice. Justice that has not been there for decades now. A justice that could have saved so much suffering, so much tension. But unfortunately, the international community has failed to deliver. Jerusalem is sacred to Muslims and Christians, as well as to Jews. Both religiously and historically, if you look at how Jerusalem has become part and parcel of Islamic history and Islamic belief, you understand then why Muslims attach so much importance to it. According to the Quran, Prophet Muhammad had a sacred journey. It's called the nocturnal journey, Isra and Miraj, where he traveled from Mecca to what we call today Masjid al-Aqsa, from which he had ascended into heaven to be in the presence of the divine. And this is called Isra and Miraj incident, or nocturnal journey of the Prophet. This is a critical moment in the Prophet's life and also in the history of Islamic belief, because it showed how unifying the Islamic perspective was on the Abrahamic tradition. Because according to the story, in that journey, the Prophet of Islam met with all the major prophets, from Jesus to Moses to Abraham, all the way to Adam. So it completes the Abrahamic tradition. Secondly, it was only after this journey, that Muslims were ordered to pray 5 times a day. And many other elements were kind of crystallized after this incident. Now, the fact that this is done, or this happened in relation to this sacred place, called Jerusalem today, made it part and parcel of Muslim understanding of faith and practice. In 638, the second caliph, Omar, entered the city of Jerusalem. Now, this is very, very early. This is the second caliph we are talking about, just a few years after the death of the Prophet. He entered the city of Jerusalem, where he issued a trust, amana, to give amnesty and security, meaning guarantees, to those living in Jerusalem at that time, Jews and Christians and others. And ever since then, Jerusalem has been a place for Muslims, Christians, Jews, and others, except when the Crusaders took Jerusalem in 1099, until 1187, when Salahuddin came along and took Jerusalem back. During that time, it's interesting, one of the first things Salahuddin did when he took Jerusalem was to bring the chief rabbi of Jerusalem from Cyprus, who had to flee Jerusalem because of the Crusaders. So he invited him back to Jerusalem. He said, you lead your community here. There are Jews living here. You are free to perform your faith, your practices here, and you're going to be part of this community. And Jerusalem remained like that until 1917, when the last garrison of the Ottoman Empire had to leave leave the city to the British. And just shortly after that, as you know, with the Balfour Declaration, those lands were given or promised, declared to the Jews as the future land of the State of Israel. The reason I mention this short historical passage is that from time to time you see sometimes some pro-Israeli Zionist pundits claiming that Jerusalem was in fact never important to Muslims until Israel laid a claim to it. And that's historically not true. Everybody knows that. And what's happening now in regards to the Palestine issue, the Palestinians are dispossessed. They are done a great injustice on a daily basis, every single day in their own lands. And Israeli policies are trying to create a people without history and land, and a land and history without the Palestinians. They claim that the Palestinians, never belonged here. They came afterwards. What afterwards? They've been living there for 1,400 years. And they're trying to change the demographic, but also the historical heritage of the Holy Lands, so that they can lay claim and make those areas part of the occupation. The problem is, at the end of the day, the problem is not with the Palestinians. The problem is not with the peace process. The problem is not with Masjid al-Aqsa or Haram al-Sharif. The problem is with the occupation. The problem is the occupation. And as long as the occupation continues, the Palestinian issue, or rather we should say the Israeli issue, Israeli question, will never be resolved. From time to time, you see this kind of wave of populism, racism, nativism, xenophobia in European and American societies as part of a number of obviously local, domestic dynamics, political dynamics. But there are also kind of deeper issues that remain there unresolved and that surface when some kind of a political crisis, emerges. I think that the deeper issues are issues of self-perception vis-a-vis others. How do you define yourself as a person, as an agent, for example, as someone who belongs to a history, a tradition, who has beliefs and ideals and searching for meaning, how that person or collective identity defines itself vis-a-vis those who are not like them, who are different. You cannot erase the sense of self-identity. Everybody is kind of born with that. It's almost ontologically impossible to erase the sense of who I am. I think it's just a liberal utopia to claim that there is a point where you and I don't matter, etc. No, we do matter. Our collective memories, who we are, what we believe, the values that we cherish, these things do matter, and they make up who we are. There's no need to try to get rid of this. It's a question of how you relate the self to others who are different than you. Are you going to try to assimilate them, dominate them, destroy them in the interest of your own self, in the name of your native culture or nationalism or nation state, or faith or beliefs? Or you're going to find a way to deal with that other that is peaceful, that is productive, that is mutually dependent, and look at the other as an opportunity rather than as a threat or as hell, as Sartre once called. He once said the other is hell. I don't think we have to see the other as hell. We can learn from other cultures and societies. We can look at the mirror and admit that maybe they are doing certain things better, different ways, from which I can learn to improve myself, enrich myself, my culture, my society, whatever cause I believe in. I believe that is possible. But to do that, we have to get beyond these very rigid definitions of the self and the other. They do not have to clash. They can learn from each other. And we have examples of this in history. Look at Andalusia, for example. For more than 700 years, Muslims, Jews, Christians lived together in peace in southern Europe, in southern Spain, in the area called Andalusia, where they exemplified the model of what the Spanish called convivencia, the coexistence of different cultures and societies. And they worked for the common good of humanity. They studied different scientific theories. They read same philosophical books. They had different ideas about certain issues, about heaven and earth and substance and accident and how things work, or music, art, taste, and things like that. But at the end of the day, while maintaining their differences, they created a superb, a very refined culture that served everyone, not just one particular group of people. Now, I think we have to address these deeper issues to prevent the next wave of racism, Islamophobia, xenophobia that will come back in one way or another over and over again, because that deeper problem or set of problems will remain there unresolved. There is a group of people who want to create more clash, more collusion for political purposes, economic purposes. But it doesn't mean that we all have to clash with one another all the time. But it's very costly. Short-term political calculations can cost societies and the world at large dearly if you do not pay attention to what is being said, what is being done. If you single out a certain group of people as potential terrorists, threats, and you ban them from entering your countries, for example, you belittle them, you establish hierarchies of culture and society and say, well, I'm superior, I'm higher, etc. Basically repeating the same 19th century racist ideology. You may have short-term political gains, but in the long run, it poisons every single element in culture, in society, in politics, in sports, in every other area, where the whole world becomes insecure. There is no way that one nation, one country will be secure today without all the others being secure at the same time. We cannot be secure until all of us are secure. And we have to keep in mind this global outlook. And we live in this age of butterfly effect, where things influence each other so quickly, so instantly, thanks to modern means of communication, social media, etc. What we say, what we do has an immediate impact on millions of people, their lives, their perceptions, their ideas, their feelings. Therefore, especially those in positions of power and influence have to be extra careful, whether they are heads of states, religious leaders, cultural icons, business people, whoever they are. They all have to work harder to limit the impact of this hostile attitude and perception that is so widespread in the world today. I mean, there is already enough conflict in the world. There is enough problems in the world. We don't need any more. We just need to have the wisdom and the patience and the intelligence and the subtlety to reduce these tensions so that the world can be a safer place for all of us. Civilizations can learn from each other. They have learned in history. If you look at ancient Greek civilization, they took a lot from ancient Egyptian civilization. If you look at ancient Chinese civilization, they took in many elements from surrounding regions. You look at the Roman Empire, Roman civilization, it took in so many things from all the way from Europe to the Middle East, Mesopotamia and Central Asia, the Balkans, etc. Look at the Islamic civilization, for example. Again, it took many elements from pre-Islamic and non-Islamic cultures and civilizations, from China to India to ancient Greek civilization, Africa, Europe, etc. So civilizations can learn from each other. Obviously, they maintain their core identity. Therefore, they protect their distinct features. Islamic civilization is Islamic civilization because of certain traits and beliefs and practices. Western civilization is Western civilization because it has certain set of ideas, principles, etc. But they can learn from each other. And when you look at today, for example, where the idea of civilization is also being questioned because of maybe as an impact of the postmodern objection to grand narratives, and because civilization is such a grand narrative, many postmodernist scholars and intellectuals kind of dismiss the idea of civilization. But I think it's still a very relevant idea. It creates a sense of loyalty and belonging in the minds of many people in the world today. Instead of kind of dismissing and rejecting, we can put it to a positive use, and where we can say, look, the differences can lead to a more colorful picture. Differences in perception about history can lead to a healthier debate about how history should be written. Differences or different perspectives on art, on culture, on the individual, on family, on urban life, and cuisine and all these things, in fact, can help us understand the subtleties of life by looking at examples that are available in other cultures. This is what globalization has made possible to a certain extent, but without the depth of civilizational production. Globalization is like it's kind of a wave that takes everything with it. But I think the civilizational depth and memory and heritage can teach us a lot today, while maintaining our own distinct features, our own identities. We can learn from others. We can enrich our own existence by appreciating the existence of others.